Dongmin pressed his back against the concrete wall as another explosion shook the building. Glass and dust fell from the ceiling above him. The alien ships had been bombing Seoul for 3 hours now. Nothing looked the same anymore. "Sergeant, we need to move," Hyung whispered next to him. Her radio equipment was damaged but still working. Static filled the air between broken transmissions from other units. Dongmin looked out the broken window. The street below was full of rubble and burning cars. Bodies lay everywhere. Some were Korean soldiers like him. Others were civilians who had been trying to run when the attack started. The aliens called themselves the Valeth. They were tall and thin with blue-gray skin. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen. Their ships floated in the sky like metal clouds, firing energy beams that could destroy entire city blocks. "Where can we go?" Dongmin asked. His rifle felt useless in his hands. The bullets did nothing against Valeth armor. Hyung checked her radio again. "I'm getting reports from Busan and Daegu. Same thing happening everywhere. The government buildings in Seoul are gone." The Blue House was hit first. Dongmin closed his eyes for a moment. He had been a soldier for 8 years. He had trained for many different kinds of war. But nobody had prepared him for this. Nobody had prepared Earth for this. The Valeth had arrived without warning. Their massive ships had appeared in Earth's sky 3 days ago. World leaders had tried to communicate with them. The aliens had responded by attacking every major military base on the planet at the same time. "Sergeant," Hyung said quietly, "look." Through the window, they could see Valeth soldiers walking down the street. They moved in perfect formation. Their weapons glowed with blue energy. They wore armor that made them look like walking machines. One of the aliens stopped and looked directly at their building. Dongmin held his breath. The creature's eyes were large and yellow. It studied the broken windows for a long moment, then continued walking. "They don't think we're a threat," Dongmin realized. "What do you mean?" "Look how they move. They're not worried about snipers or ambushes. They're walking in the open like they own the place." Hyung frowned. "They do own the place now." More explosions echoed from the distance. Dongmin's radio crackled to life. A voice spoke in broken Korean with a strange accent. "People of Earth, your military forces have been defeated. Your governments no longer exist. Submit to Valeth authority and you will not be harmed. Resistance is pointless." The message repeated in different languages: Chinese, English, Japanese, Russian. The same words over and over. "Pointless," Hyung muttered. "They think we're finished." Dongmin looked at his rifle again. She was right. Traditional fighting was finished. The Valeth had destroyed Earth's armies in less than a week. Their technology was too advanced. Their ships were too powerful. But something in the aliens' message bothered him. They expected humans to submit. They expected organized surrender from organized forces. They thought like generals fighting other generals. "Hyung, what do you know about the Korean War?" She looked confused. "The Korean War? Why are you thinking about history now? Just answer me." "Well, the Chinese and Americans had better equipment than the Korean fighters. But the war lasted 3 years anyway. Why?" "Because the Koreans didn't fight like the Chinese and Americans expected them to fight." Hyung was starting to understand. "You mean guerrilla tactics? The Valeth destroyed our armies because they fought our armies. But what if there are no more armies? What if there are only small groups hiding in the ruins?" Another group of Valeth soldiers passed by their window. They moved with confidence, not watching the shadows or checking corners. They acted like conquerors walking through a defeated city. "They're not ready for a different kind of war," Dongmin said. Hyung checked her radio equipment. "I'm still getting signals from scattered units. Not many, but some. Can you contact them?" "Maybe. The aliens are jamming most frequencies, but I know some old military channels they might not have found yet." Dongmin made his decision. "Do it. Tell any survivors to avoid direct contact with enemy forces. Tell them to hide, watch, and learn. What about orders from command? There is no command anymore. There's just us." Hyung began working with her radio. After several minutes, she managed to reach 3 different groups. One was in Incheon, one in Gwangju, and one in Jeju Island. All reported the same thing. Their units were destroyed, their commanders were dead, but small groups of soldiers were still alive. "What do we tell them?" Hyung asked. Dongmin thought about his military training. Everything he had learned was about fighting other armies. Rules of engagement, proper uniforms, clear battle lines. The Valeth expected that kind of war because that was how civilized species fought. But humans had fought differently before. When the Mongols invaded Korea, some Koreans had hidden in the mountains and struck at supply lines. When the Japanese occupied Korea, some Koreans had formed secret groups that attacked without warning and disappeared. Tell them to forget everything they learned about being soldiers, Dongmin said. Tell them to remember everything they know about being Korean. The message went out on the hidden frequencies. Over the next few hours, responses came back. Groups in different cities reported that they understood. They would watch the aliens. They would learn their patterns. They would wait for opportunities. As night fell, Dongmin and Ha-Young moved through the ruined city. They saw Valeth patrols everywhere, but the aliens only walked on main roads. They avoided the narrow alleys and damaged buildings where humans might be hiding. They're afraid of getting dirty, Ha-Young observed, or they think it's beneath them to check every hiding place. They found other survivors in a subway station. Taeho was a young man from Jeju Island who had been visiting Seoul when the attack started. Sun-hee was a military medic whose hospital had been destroyed. There were others, maybe 20 people total. Most of them were scared and confused. They wanted to know what to do next. Some talked about surrendering to the aliens. Others wanted to try reaching other countries. There are no other countries anymore. Dongmin told them, "The aliens hit everywhere at once. Earth's governments are gone. So what do we do?" Taeho asked. Dongmin looked around at the frightened faces. These were not soldiers. They were ordinary people whose world had ended in a single day. But they were still alive, and that meant something. "We survive," he said. "We learn how they think and how they move. We find their weaknesses, and when we're ready, we make them pay for what they did to our world." Sun-hee stepped forward. "I'm a medic, not a fighter." "Then you keep us alive so we can fight." "I'm just a farmer," Taeho said. "Then you know how to work hard and be patient." One by one, the survivors nodded. They did not look like soldiers or heroes. They looked like ordinary people who had lost everything. But in their eyes, Dongmin saw something the Valeth had not expected to find. He saw anger that would not die. The next morning, alien ships flew overhead, broadcasting the same surrender message. But in the ruins below, small groups of humans were already watching and learning. They counted the ships. They timed the patrols. They studied the enemy that had destroyed their world. The Valeth thought the war was over. They were wrong. The war was just beginning, and it would be unlike anything they had ever faced. 3 months had passed since the invasion. Dongmin crouched behind a pile of broken concrete, watching the Valeth patrol walk down the empty street. He had been observing this same route for 2 weeks now. The aliens always came at exactly 14 hours. They always took the same path. They always stopped at the same 3 checkpoints. The Valeth were creatures of habit. This was their weakness. "Target acquired," Ha-Young whispered into her radio. She was positioned 2 blocks away with a clear view of the patrol's return route. "Bitna, are you ready?" Dongmin asked. "Explosives are set," came the reply from the teenage girl who had joined their group a month ago. Bitna had been studying engineering before the invasion. Now she studied how to make bombs from scavenged materials. The patrol consisted of 4 Valeth soldiers. They moved with the same arrogant confidence as always. Their energy weapons hummed softly as they scanned the ruins for signs of human activity. They found nothing because the humans had learned to hide better than ghosts. Dongmin watched the aliens approach the intersection where Bitna had planted her surprise. The explosives were hidden inside what looked like ordinary rubble. The Valeth would never suspect that humans could create such sophisticated traps. "Now," Dongmin whispered. The explosion shattered the silence. Fire and smoke erupted from the street as chunks of concrete flew in all directions. When the dust cleared, 3 of the 4 Valeth soldiers were down. The 4th was badly injured and trying to call for help. Taeho appeared from a nearby building. The young farmer had changed much in 3 months. His hands no longer shook when he held a weapon. His eyes had grown cold and focused. He finished the wounded alien quickly and efficiently. "Weapons and equipment," Dongmin ordered. The team moved fast. They stripped the dead Valeth of anything useful. Energy cells, communication devices, armor pieces that might fit a human. Everything went into bags that could be carried quickly. 30 seconds, Ha-Young warned. She was monitoring Valeth radio frequencies, listening for the response to the patrol's missed check-in. The team vanished into the ruins, just as alien aircraft appeared overhead. The Valeth ship circled the area for an hour, scanning for the attackers. They found nothing. The humans had already reached their safe house 3 kilometers away. This was the 15th successful ambush in Seoul alone. Similar attacks were happening in cities across the world. The scattered human resistance groups had learned to communicate using frequencies the aliens could not decode. They shared information about Valeth patrol patterns, weak points in alien equipment, and effective tactics. "We got something new this time," Ha-Young said, examining a captured Valeth communication device. She had become expert at intercepting alien transmissions. "Listen to this." The device played a recording in the Valeth language. Ha-Young had learned enough of their words to translate the basic meaning. "The patrol commander is reporting to his superior. He says human attacks are increasing. He wants more soldiers for patrol duty." "What does his superior say?" Sun He asked. The medic had also changed. She no longer just treated wounds. She studied Valeth anatomy and looked for new ways to exploit their biological weaknesses. "The superior says no additional forces are available. He tells the commander to adapt his patrol routes and timing." Dongmin smiled grimly. "They're starting to react to us instead of ignoring us." The resistance had learned that Valeth society was highly structured. They had different castes with different roles. The warrior caste that occupied Earth was trained for conventional warfare between organized armies. They did not understand how to fight an enemy that had no uniforms, no bases, and no rules. "There's more," Ha-Young continued. "The patrol commander asks why humans don't fight with honor. He wants to know why we attack from hiding instead of facing them directly." Kyung-soo laughed bitterly. The former police detective had joined their group after his station was destroyed. "Honor? They killed billions of people from orbit and they talk about honor? It's good that they think this way," Sun He said. "If they can't understand our tactics, they can't counter them effectively." The resistance had also learned about Valeth psychology. The aliens valued what they called clean combat between organized forces. They considered ambushes and hidden attacks to be beneath civilized beings. This cultural blindness made them vulnerable to human tactics. Wu Jin entered the safe house carrying a bag of salvaged electronics. The former gang member had proven surprisingly good at acquiring supplies through methods the military had never taught. His knowledge of illegal activities had become valuable survival skills. "I made contact with the groups in Busan and Daegu," he reported. "They want to coordinate a joint operation next week." "What kind of operation?" Dongmin asked. "Hit their supply convoy simultaneously. Make them think we have more people than we actually do." This was another lesson the resistance had learned. The Valeth expected human attacks to be random and desperate. Coordinated strikes across multiple cities would confuse them and make the resistance seem larger and more organized than it really was. Bitna was working at a table covered with scavenged alien technology. She had learned to modify Valeth energy cells to power human equipment. More importantly, she had learned to make them explode at exactly the right moment. "I've been thinking about their patrol aircraft," she said without looking up from her work. "They always follow the same flight patterns. What if we could predict where they'll be at a specific time?" "You want to shoot down their aircraft?" Taeho asked. "I want to make them afraid to fly predictable routes." This was the goal of every resistance operation, not just to kill Valeth soldiers, but to make them change their behavior. Force them to waste resources on security, make them nervous and uncertain, turn their own efficiency against them. Sun He had been studying captured medical supplies and alien autopsy reports. "I've learned something interesting about their biology," she announced. "Their hearing is much more sensitive than ours. Certain frequencies cause them significant pain." "Sonic weapons?" Dongmin asked. "Possibly, or at least sonic distractions that could give us tactical advantages." The resistance was adapting faster than their enemy. Humans had always been good at learning new skills under pressure. The Valeth had conquered dozens of worlds, but they had never faced a species quite like humanity. That night, Ha-Young intercepted another alien transmission. This one was different. It was a report from a Valeth field commander to the invasion fleet's central command. "What does it say?" Dongmin asked. Ha-Young looked troubled as she translated. "The commander is requesting permission to use heavier weapons against civilian areas. He says the human resistance is operating from populated zones and conventional tactics are not working." "Will they approve it?" "The central command says no. They need human population centers intact for labor purposes. The commander is ordered to find other solutions." This was valuable intelligence. The Valeth wanted to preserve Earth's infrastructure and population for their own use. This limited their options for dealing with the resistance. They could not simply destroy entire cities to eliminate hidden fighters. They're trapped by their own goals, Sun-Hee observed. They can't win by destroying what they came to take. Over the following weeks, resistance operations became more sophisticated. Groups learned to work together across vast distances. They developed signals and codes that the Valeth could not break. They created supply networks that could move weapons and information through occupied territory. Most importantly, they learned to think like predators instead of soldiers. Taeho proved especially good at this new kind of thinking. His background as a farmer had taught him patience and careful observation. Now he applied these skills to hunting Valeth patrols. Animals have patterns, he explained to newer resistance members. They eat at certain times, sleep in certain places, follow the same paths every day. The Valeth are just another kind of animal. The aliens' own efficiency became their weakness. They scheduled everything precisely. They followed procedures exactly. They trusted their technology completely. None of this helped them against an enemy that watched from the shadows and struck without warning. By the end of the 3rd month, Valeth forces in Seoul had tripled their patrol strength. They traveled in larger groups and changed routes more frequently. Their response times to attacks had improved significantly, but none of these changes solved their fundamental problem. They were fighting an enemy they did not understand, using methods their culture could not accept. "We're winning," Ha-Young said one evening as she monitored alien communications. "How do you know?" Dongmin asked. "Because they're scared. For the first time since they arrived, they're actually scared of us." The resistance had learned something important about fear. It was a weapon more powerful than any bomb. And humans, as it turned out, were very good at becoming frightening. 1 year after the invasion, Dongmin no longer looked like the soldier he had once been. His face was thinner and his eyes had changed. They moved constantly, always watching, always calculating. He had learned to see the world as a collection of weapons, hiding places, and opportunities. The Valeth patrol was approaching the abandoned shopping center where his team waited. But this was not like the simple ambushes of earlier months. This was something new, something that would teach the aliens that humans could be more than just dangerous. They could be terrifying. "Positions," Dongmin whispered into his radio. Bitna was on the 3rd floor with her latest creation. She called it a screamer, a device that used the Valeth's sensitive hearing against them. When activated, it produced sounds that caused the aliens intense pain and disorientation. Tae-ho was in the basement with Kyung-soo. They had learned to move through the building's air ducts and maintenance tunnels. The Valeth never expected attacks to come from above or below because their own architecture did not include such spaces. Sun-Hee waited in the medical supply room. Her role had expanded far beyond treating wounded resistance fighters. She now studied Valeth psychology and developed new ways to break their minds as well as their bodies. "Contact in 60 seconds, Ha-Young reported from her observation post. The patrol consisted of 8 Valeth soldiers, twice the normal size. They had learned to travel in larger groups after months of human attacks. But larger groups moved more slowly and made bigger targets. "Remember," Dongmin said quietly, "we want prisoners this time." The resistance had learned that captured Valeth could provide valuable information. But more importantly, they had discovered that Valeth soldiers who survived human attacks returned to their bases changed. They spread fear among their comrades just by describing what humans were capable of. The aliens entered the shopping center cautiously. Their weapons were ready and their movements were nervous. They no longer walked with the arrogant confidence of the early invasion. Months of resistance attacks had taught them to expect danger everywhere. But they still thought like civilized beings facing other civilized beings. They did not understand that their enemies had stopped being civilized long ago. Bitna activated the screamer. The sound hit the Valeth like a physical blow. Their sensitive ears could not filter out the painful frequencies. 3 of them dropped their weapons and clutched their heads. The others tried to maintain formation, but their coordination was broken. Tae-ho and Kyung-soo struck from above and below simultaneously. They moved through spaces the Valeth had not known existed, appearing and disappearing like nightmares. Their weapons were designed to wound rather than kill quickly. Wounded aliens made noise and created panic among their comrades. The Valeth tried to retreat but found their exit blocked. Dongmin had learned to think several moves ahead. The shopping center had become a trap with only one way out, and that way led through carefully prepared kill zones. Surrender and you will be treated according to the rules of war, one of the Valeth called out in broken Korean. Dongmin almost laughed. Rules of war. The aliens still believed such things mattered. We don't follow your rules, he replied in the Valeth language that Ha Young had taught him. The attack continued for exactly 17 minutes. When it was over, 5 Valeth were dead and 3 were captured alive. The human team had not suffered a single casualty, but the real victory was not in the numbers. It was in the way the surviving Valeth looked at their captors. Their large yellow eyes showed something that had never been there before. Terror. Sun He examined the prisoners while Ha Young worked on their communication equipment. The medic had learned to read Valeth expressions and body language. She could tell when they were lying, when they were afraid, and when they were close to breaking. This one is a squad leader, she reported, indicating the largest of the 3 prisoners. He's trying to show courage, but his stress indicators suggest he's close to panic. What about the others? Younger soldiers. First deployment to Earth. They've heard stories about human tactics, but this is their first direct experience. Kyung-soo had found something interesting in the aliens' equipment. Look at this, he said, holding up a small device. It's some kind of recording unit. They've been documenting their patrols. Ha-young connected the device to her translation equipment. The recordings were reports from various Valeth units across the city. As she played them back, the resistance team learned how their enemy really saw them. Unit 7 reports contact with human insurgents. Unconventional tactics observed. Request tactical guidance. Unit 12 has lost contact. Last transmission mentioned sounds of unknown origin and attacks from building infrastructure. Medical unit requests additional psychological support staff. Combat troops are reporting increased stress and sleep disruption after encounters with human forces. The recordings painted a picture of an occupying force under increasing strain. The Valeth had expected to face desperate but disorganized resistance. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to understand them better than they understood themselves. They're calling us shadow killers now, Ha Young translated. It appears in multiple reports. Bitna looked pleased. Good. Let them be afraid of shadows. But Dongmin noticed something troubling in his team's faces. The satisfaction they took in Valeth fear was different from the determination he had seen months earlier. They were changing just as he was changing. The war was making them into something new, something that enjoyed causing terror. The interrogation of the Valeth prisoners revealed useful information about alien patrol schedules, communication codes, and base locations. But it also revealed something about the interrogators themselves. Sun He had developed techniques that exploited Valeth's psychological weaknesses. She knew exactly how to break down their mental defenses without causing physical harm. Her methods were effective, but they required a kind of detached cruelty that worried Dongmin. Are you all right? He asked her after the session. She looked at him with eyes that had grown cold over the months of war. I'm doing what needs to be done. But are you all right? Sun He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know who I am anymore. I used to save lives. Now I spend my time learning how to destroy minds. It's for the resistance. I know. That's what worries me. The captured information led to a series of coordinated strikes across the city. Resistance teams hit supply depots, communication centers, and isolated outposts simultaneously. Each attack was designed not just to cause damage, but to create maximum psychological impact. Taeho had become particularly skilled at what he called ghost attacks. He would infiltrate Valeth positions, sabotage equipment, and leave without being detected. The aliens would find their weapons disabled or their communications cut with no sign of how the damage had been done. They're starting to check their equipment constantly, he reported after one such mission. Some of them barely sleep because they're afraid their weapons might stop working. The resistance had learned that the Valeth trusted their technology completely. When that technology failed unexpectedly, it created a deep sense of vulnerability that was hard to overcome. Wu Jin had developed his own specialty. He kidnapped individual Valeth soldiers from their patrols and released them days later, in locations far from where they had been taken. The returned soldiers could never explain how they had been moved or where they had been held. It's not about the information we get from them, he explained. It's about making the others wonder if they could be next. These tactics were working. Valeth forces in Seoul had become increasingly defensive and paranoid. Their patrols moved in larger groups and avoided areas where humans might be hiding. Their response to resistance activities became slower and less coordinated, but the cost was becoming visible in the resistance fighters themselves. They were efficient and deadly, but they were no longer the frightened survivors who had hidden in subway stations a year earlier. Kyung-soo had lost the ability to trust anyone completely. He checked every room for hidden threats and kept weapons within reach even when sleeping. Bitna talked about her explosives with an enthusiasm that made others uncomfortable. She had become fascinated with creating new ways to cause fear and confusion among enemy forces. Taeho barely spoke anymore, except to report mission results. The friendly farmer had become a silent predator who thought only about his next target. "We're winning," Ha-young said during one of their planning sessions. The Valeth are requesting reinforcements and additional psychological support for their troops. "At what cost?" Dongmin asked. "What do you mean?" "Look at us. Look at what we've become." Ha-young was quiet for a moment. "We've become what we needed to become to survive." "And after the war? What happens to us then?" "There might not be an after. There might only be the war." That night, Dongmin received a transmission from resistance groups in other cities. Similar reports came from around the world. Human fighters were becoming more effective and more frightening with each passing month. But they were also becoming less human. The Valeth had invaded Earth expecting to face soldiers. Instead, they had created monsters, and those monsters were winning. 2 years after the invasion, the Valeth no longer controlled Earth. They occupied heavily fortified bases and moved between them in armored convoys, but the planet belonged to the humans who hunted them in the darkness. Dongmin studied the fortress that had once been Seoul's city hall. The Valeth had turned it into their regional command center, surrounding it with energy barriers and automated defense systems. They believed it was impregnable. They were wrong. "Target analysis complete," Ha-young reported through the encrypted communication network that now connected resistance cells across 6 continents. 47 Valeth personnel inside. Commander Veltar is confirmed present. Veltar was one of the aliens' most senior leaders on Earth. He had been requesting evacuation for months, claiming that human tactics violated every principle of civilized warfare. The Galactic Confederation had refused his requests, unable to believe that a primitive species could threaten their forces. "Bitna, what's the status on the barrier generators?" Dongmin asked. "All set," came the reply from somewhere in the building's superstructure. The young woman had learned to move through spaces that seemed impossible to navigate. "Give me 30 seconds and their shields will have some very interesting weaknesses." The resistance had evolved far beyond simple ambushes and sabotage. They now conducted complex operations that would have impressed military academies, but their methods remained focused on psychological impact rather than pure destruction. "Taeho, Kyung-soo, are your teams in position?" "Ready," Taeho replied from his position in the underground tunnels. He led a group of fighters who specialized in appearing where the enemy least expected them. "Ready," Kyung-soo confirmed from his observation post across the street. His team included former police officers and criminals who understood urban warfare better than any textbook. Sun-hee was not participating in this operation directly. She remained at the Resistance's hidden medical facility, treating wounded fighters and developing new psychological warfare techniques. Her work had become essential to breaking Valeth morale across the occupied zones. "Begin Phase 1, Dongmin ordered. The first attack came from above. Wu Jin's team had learned to use alien aircraft that they had captured and modified. The Valeth air defenses were designed to stop enemy ships, not their own vehicles being used against them. The modified craft dropped sonic charges that penetrated the fortress's energy barriers. The sounds were carefully calibrated to cause maximum distress to Valeth nervous systems. Inside the building, alien soldiers would be experiencing painful disorientation and panic. Phase 2, Dongmin said. Bitna's sabotage began. The fortress's defensive systems started failing in ways that seemed impossible. Weapons powered down randomly. Communication arrays broadcast strange signals. Environmental controls created uncomfortable temperatures and lighting conditions. The Valeth inside knew they were under attack, but they could not identify the source of their problems. Their sensors showed no enemy forces approaching. Their perimeter defenses remained intact, yet their base was becoming increasingly unreliable and hostile. Phase 3. Taeho's infiltration teams emerged from tunnels that the Valeth had not known existed. They moved through the building's service areas, appearing in corridors and rooms without warning. They did not kill immediately. Instead, they disabled individual aliens and dragged them into the infrastructure where they disappeared completely. From the Valeth perspective, their comrades were simply vanishing without explanation. Kyungsu's teams provided external pressure. They surrounded the building at a distance, making it clear that escape was impossible. But they did not attack directly. They simply waited, letting the aliens inside understand that they were trapped. Phase 4. This was the psychological component that Sun He had designed. Hyung began broadcasting messages in the Valeth language. The transmissions contained detailed information about each alien inside the fortress. Names, family relationships, personal fears, service records. The humans knew everything about their enemies. They had been watching and learning for 2 years. Commander Veltar, Hyung's voice echoed through the building's communication system. You have requested evacuation 17 times. Your superiors have denied every request. They consider you expendable. The broadcast continued with similar personal messages for each Valeth soldier, private information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. Fear began to spread through the fortress as the aliens realized how thoroughly they had been studied. Phase 5. The final phase was simple. Dongmin walked to the fortress's main entrance and requested to speak with the commander. He came alone and unarmed. The Valeth could have killed him easily, but doing so would have violated their cultural concepts of honor. A single human challenging an entire fortress required a formal response according to their traditions. Commander Veltar met him at the entrance. The alien was tall and imposing, wearing ceremonial armor that marked his high rank. But his eyes showed the strain of 2 years fighting an enemy he could not understand. You wish to surrender? Veltar asked in accented Korean. I wish to offer you terms, Dongmin replied in fluent Valeth. The alien's expression changed. Humans were not supposed to speak the Valeth language with such precision. What terms? You and your soldiers will leave this planet within 48 hours. In return, we will allow you to depart alive. Veltar's translator struggled with the concept. You are offering us mercy? We are offering you survival. This is impossible. Your species lacks the capability to threaten Valeth forces. Dongmin smiled and Veltar stepped backward involuntarily. There was something in the human's expression that triggered deep evolutionary fears. Commander, in the past 6 months, 17 Valeth bases have been captured or destroyed. Your forces now control less than 30% of Earth's surface. Your soldiers require psychological medication to function effectively. Your request for reinforcements has been denied because the Confederation cannot spare additional ships for what they consider a minor pacification operation. Every word was true, and Veltar knew it. How do you know this information? We know everything about you. We know your supply schedules, your communication codes, your personnel files. We know which of your soldiers has nightmares about human attacks and which ones have requested transfer to other worlds. Ha-Young's intelligence network had become incredibly sophisticated. Resistance cells included former translators, computer specialists, and communications experts who had learned to infiltrate Valeth information systems. We also know, Dongmin continued, that your superiors consider Earth to be a training ground for junior officers. They send you their least experienced commanders and their oldest equipment because they do not believe humans pose a real threat. This was perhaps the most devastating revelation. Veltar had suspected that the Confederation was not taking Earth seriously, but hearing it confirmed by a human was humiliating. What proof do you have of your capabilities? Instead of answering, Dongmin activated a small device. Throughout the fortress, Valeth soldiers began reporting that their weapons had been disarmed remotely. Environmental systems shut down completely. Emergency lighting bathed everything in red. Your base is now completely under our control, Dongmin explained. We could have killed everyone inside before making contact with you. We chose not to because dead Valeth do not carry messages back to the Confederation. Veltar was beginning to understand. This was not just a military defeat. It was a demonstration designed to send a message to his superiors. What message do you want us to deliver? Tell them that Earth is defended by an enemy unlike any they have encountered before. Tell them that humans do not fight for territory or resources. We fight for the right to exist, and we will use any method necessary to win that fight. The conversation continued for another hour. Veltar asked questions about human tactics and capabilities. Dongmin answered some and left others deliberately mysterious. The goal was to create a sense of uncertainty that would spread throughout the Valeth military hierarchy. Finally, the alien commander agreed to the terms. His forces would evacuate within the specified time limit. In return, they would be allowed to leave with their personal equipment and a detailed report of human capabilities. One final question, Veltar said before departing. What has this war done to your species? Dongmin considered the question carefully. He thought about his team and the changes he had seen in them over 2 years of constant conflict. He thought about the resistance fighters around the world who had learned to become creatures of shadow and nightmare. It has made us into something you should fear, he answered. As the Valeth forces departed Seoul, similar evacuations began in other cities around the world. The terror campaign had achieved its primary objective. The occupying forces were leaving not because they had been defeated in battle, but because they could no longer function effectively in an environment of constant psychological pressure. But the victory came with a cost that was only beginning to be understood. The humans who had won this war were no longer the same. Species that had been invaded 2 years earlier, they had become something new, something adapted for a kind of warfare that civilized beings were not supposed to practice, and they were very good at. 3 years after the invasion, Dongmin stood on the roof of Seoul's tallest remaining building and watched the last Valeth ships disappear into the morning sky. The war was over. Earth was free, but victory felt nothing like he had imagined it would. Final confirmation from all sectors, Ha Young reported through her communication equipment. Valeth evacuation is complete. No alien forces remain on the planet. Around the world, similar reports were coming in. The resistance networks that had grown to cover every continent were confirming the same thing. The occupiers were gone. The terror campaign had succeeded beyond all expectations. What are your orders? Asked Taeho, though his voice carried no emotion. The young farmer had become something cold and efficient during the war. He still followed orders, but the enthusiasm and hope that had once driven him were gone. Dongmin did not answer immediately. Orders implied that there was still a military structure to give them. But the resistance had never been a real army. It had been a collection of survivors who had learned to fight like predators. Now that there was no prey left to hunt, what were they supposed to become? Stand down all combat operations, he finally said. Begin transition to whatever comes next. But none of them knew what came next. They had spent 3 years learning to be killers, saboteurs, and psychological warriors. Those skills were not easily forgotten or redirected. Sunhee arrived at the building an hour later. She had been coordinating medical care for the few Valeth soldiers who had been too injured to evacuate with their forces. Even in victory, she continued to study alien psychology and biology. The prisoners we released are carrying detailed reports about our capabilities, she said. The Galactic Confederation will know exactly what kind of enemy they faced here. Is that good or bad? Kyung-soo asked. Both. They'll know not to underestimate us again, but they'll also know to fear us. The former police detective had become expert at interrogation and intelligence gathering during the war. His methods were effective, but had changed him in ways that made normal human interaction difficult. Bitna was already working on her next project, despite the war being over. She could not stop building weapons and defensive systems. The need to prepare for the next attack had become compulsive. We should fortify the major cities, she said, studying blueprints and technical specifications. Install planetary defense systems. Prepare for when they come back. They might not come back, Dongmin pointed out. They will. Not tomorrow. Maybe not for years, but they will. And we need to be ready. This was the reality that none of them wanted to face. The war had ended, but the warriors it had created could not simply return to peaceful lives. They had been changed too fundamentally. Wu Jin had spent the morning reviewing resistance assets and capabilities. The criminal skills that had made him valuable during the war were still valuable, but now they seemed out of place in a world trying to rebuild. We have weapons caches in every major city, he reported. Communication networks that can't be detected by conventional technology. Safe houses and supply lines that could support operations for decades. Operations against what? Ha Young asked. The war is over, is it? Or did we just win the first round? That was the question that haunted all of them. They had driven off the Valeth, but Earth was now known to the Galactic Confederation as a hostile world. Other alien species would study what had happened here. Some might decide that humans were too dangerous to be allowed to survive. The Confederation has 47 member species, Sun He said, consulting her intelligence files. The Valeth were considered middle tier in terms of military capability. There are stronger species that might view us as a threat. Good, Tejo said quietly. Let them fear us. His response revealed how completely the war had changed them. The idea of being feared by alien civilizations did not disturb him. It satisfied something that the conflict had created in his personality. Over the following days, the scope of their victory became clear. Valeth forces had evacuated not just Earth but the entire solar system. Reports from the outer planets confirmed that mining operations and research stations had been abandoned. But the cost was also becoming visible. Earth's population had been reduced by nearly half during the 3-year occupation. Most major cities were damaged or destroyed. Industrial capacity was minimal. Agricultural systems had been disrupted. The survivors were tough and resourceful, but they were also traumatized and changed by their experiences. Many had spent years in hiding or fighting underground. They did not easily trust others or accept authority. We need to establish some kind of government, Dongmin said during a meeting with resistance leaders from around the world. People need structure and leadership. What kind of government? Asked Jin Wu, who had led resistance operations in North America. Democracy? Military rule? Something new? The question was more complicated than it seemed. Traditional governments had failed completely during the invasion. The survivors had learned to organize themselves in small, independent groups that could operate without central authority. Maybe we don't need a traditional government, suggested Min Seo, the resistance coordinator for Africa. Maybe we need something that can respond to the kind of threats we face now. She was referring to the reality that Earth was no longer an isolated world. It was part of a larger galactic community that included species with advanced technology and hostile intentions. A defense council, Ha Young suggested. Representatives from each region, but focused on protecting against alien threats rather than managing domestic affairs. The discussion continued for hours, but no clear consensus emerged. The resistance leaders had learned to work together during the war, but they had very different ideas about what should come after. Some wanted to rebuild Earth's civilization as it had been before the invasion. Others believed that the old ways of thinking had made humanity vulnerable and needed to be replaced. We're not the same species we were 3 years ago, Kyung-soo observed. Maybe we shouldn't try to recreate what we used to be. This was perhaps the most important realization. The war had not just changed individual people. It had changed humanity itself. They had learned capabilities and developed instincts that no human civilization had ever possessed. The Valeth made a mistake when they invaded us, Dongmin said. They thought they were conquering a primitive species. Instead, they created something new, something adapted for the kind of universe we actually live in. The meeting ended without firm decisions, but with a commitment to continue working together. The resistance networks would evolve into something new, though none of them were sure what that would be. In the months that followed, reports began arriving from the edges of human-controlled space. Automated monitoring stations detected alien ships observing Earth from a distance. They did not approach or attempt communication, but their presence was constant. We're being studied, Ha Young reported. Multiple species are sending reconnaissance missions to observe our world. What do they see when they look at us? Sun He asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. A message was received from the Galactic Confederation, transmitted through diplomatic channels that the resistance had never known existed. The message was simple. The species known as humans has demonstrated capabilities that require re-evaluation of contact protocols. Direct intervention in their development is suspended pending further study. They're afraid to come here, Bitna realized. Not afraid, Dongmin corrected. Cautious. They've learned that we're not what we appeared to be. The message continued with an offer. Humans could apply for membership in the Galactic Confederation if they agreed to certain restrictions on their military development and expansion activities. Restrictions? Tejo said. They want to limit what we can do? They want to control us, Wu Jin added. Make sure we don't become a threat to other species. The offer sparked debate among the resistance leadership. Some saw it as an opportunity to join the galactic community and gain access to advanced technology. Others viewed it as another form of conquest, more subtle than the Valeth invasion but equally dangerous. We're not ready for that decision, Dongmin concluded. We need time to understand what we've become and what we want to be. Years passed. Earth slowly rebuilt, but it remained a world apart from the rest of human history. The survivors had children who grew up learning skills that previous generations never needed. Defense planning, guerrilla tactics, how to hide from orbital surveillance. The resistance networks evolved into a new kind of civilization, one that could appear peaceful and normal to outside observers, but could transform instantly into something lethal if threatened. And throughout the galaxy, other species shared stories about the world where primitive creatures had turned themselves into monsters to defeat their conquerors. Some told these stories as warnings. Others told them as inspiration. But all of them remembered the lesson. Never underestimate a species fighting for survival. On Earth, Dongmin continued to lead what had once been called the Resistance. He was older now, but still vigilant, still watching the skies for the next threat, because he knew, as they all knew, that the war had not really ended. It had only paused, and when it resumed, humanity would be ready.